It seems to me that while we're in that fairly narrow window, 10, 20 years left of real leverage to affect the outcome, we best be doing all that we can. I'm very glad to see the kind of level of urgency, and very glad to see the sort of level of realism and understanding that young people around the world have brought to this. And there are a lot of them. Everybody rightly watches Greta Thunberg because she's great, and I like her as much in person as from a distance. She couldn't be better. But there's thousands of Gretas out there around the world, young people. That there really is a global audience here, and it's not who people thought it was. I'd always heard that environmentalism was something that rich white people did, and if you didn't know where your next meal was coming from, you wouldn't be an environmentalist, and on and on. But from the day of our first global day of action, it's been very clear that most of the people doing this work are poor, Black and brown and Asian and young, because that's actually what almost all the world is. And what do you know, they're as absolutely interested in the future as anybody else. So that's been sort of good to realize from the start, that there's an enormous amount of diversity, and the fight in many ways is led by the people who are on the front lines of the damage, who come from indigenous communities, on and on. The most important thing that individuals can do is be a little less individuals and join together with others in movements large enough to change things. And setting up those movements, that's why we did things like 350. And once we had them set up, we discovered that if you got involved in fights that seemed to have a plausibly important outcome, then people would be willing to go do amazing things. When the powers that be tell you that it's pointless to do it, don't pay much attention. I've been very impressed by the fact that when we fight, we win a lot of the time. That's why movements are so important. The job of movements is not to win particular fights. It's to engage in particular fights in order to shift the zeitgeist. And at the end of the day, if you can shift the zeitgeist, people's sense of what's normal and natural and obvious, then you will win. So, what Bernie did was important in so many ways. He's the guy who kicked the door down. He demonstrated in 2016 that there was a huge constituency for a far more progressive view of the world than anyone had suspected. A movement has to be more than leaders. It better be more than leaders, because I don't want to get run over by a bus. So that's why it's so important to build big, broad movements. That's how you change the zeitgeist. And when you do, you make it possible for your champions like Bernie to do great things. You've cleared space for them. And you make it necessary for people who aren't champions to nonetheless do the right thing. The other sort of fight that we helped get going was this fight about divestment. And so it became a great way for people to organize at their university, through their church denomination, through the pension fund of their local community, on and on and on. And we're now at the point where, I think that campaign has sort of rewritten the story of how we think about money and fossil fuel. I think we're past $11 trillion now in endowments and portfolios that have divested. By that measure, it's the biggest anti-corporate campaign in history. Because it's an election year, and because our elections literally go on forever, everyone gets concentrated on Washington to an enormous extent, and political power. That's good, that's important, that's useful. I hope that people also remember that there's another power center in this world. We'll call it Wall Street for shorthand. It's linked in certain ways to Washington, but it's independent too in certain ways. And if we want action on the scale we need on climate change in the time that we have, it's important to be pushing that lever too. Results out of Washington are always going to be slow. That's how politics works. Action in the financial markets, if you can force the pillars of global capital to shift, then action comes in a matter of hours. The stock market opens, and by the time it closes, the values of things have shifted in profound ways that echo with enormous power out through the world. If we can get action on Wall Street, the results are likely to be global, which is a good thing because they don't call it global warming for nothing. So that's why I'm spending as much time worried about Wall Street as about Washington. The planet's outside its comfort zone. That's pretty obvious. We've lost half the ice in the summer Arctic. The ocean's 30% more acidic. We have the city literally called paradise that literally turned into hell inside half an hour. The planet's outside its comfort zone, so I guess we better be outside ours a little bit too.
It's a revolution.